The first time I helped the single mom next door, 3 of my neighbors warned me not to. Not 1, 3. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong. Not with her. With them. My name is Ryan Parker. I was 38 years old, recently divorced, and 6 months into rebuilding a life I hadn't planned on having. The small house on Maple Street was supposed to be temporary. Quiet place. A place to think. A place where nobody knew my history. What I didn't know was that the woman living next door had a reputation. And in neighborhoods like ours, reputations spread faster than truth. Her name was Claire Morgan. She was a single mother raising an 8-year-old daughter named Lily. Every morning at 6:30, Claire left for work. Every evening she came home exhausted. And every weekend she seemed to spend catching up on everything she didn't have time for during the week. The strange thing was that nobody ever talked about how hard she worked. They only talked about her mistakes, or at least the mistakes they thought she had made. One Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee on my porch when a white pickup truck stopped in front of Claire's house. 2 men stepped out carrying clipboards. A few minutes later, another neighbor appeared. Then another. Within 10 minutes, half the street seemed interested in whatever was happening. I walked closer. One of the men handed Claire a document. She read it, said nothing, then folded the paper carefully and thanked him. Thanked him. That caught my attention. Most people would have argued. Most people would have complained. Claire simply nodded and went back to pulling weeds from her front garden. What happened? I asked a woman standing nearby. She rolled her eyes. Another HOA violation. I looked toward Claire's yard. It wasn't perfect, but it certainly wasn't terrible. What violation? The grass is too high. I stared. You've got to be kidding. The woman shrugged. Rules are rules. Then she lowered her voice. Honestly, she brings most of it on herself. There it was. The judgment. I had only lived there 6 months, but I'd heard versions of that sentence before. Nobody ever explained exactly what Claire had done. They just spoke about her as if everyone already knew. As if she had failed some invisible test. As if she deserved to be discussed instead of understood. Across the street, Claire continued working. Alone. No complaints. No excuses. No drama. Just quiet determination. That's when another neighbor stepped beside me. An older man named Frank. Retired. Friendly enough. Most of the time. He nodded toward Claire. Careful, Ryan. I frowned. About what? Frank smirked. That one. I looked at him, then back at Claire, then back at him. What exactly is that supposed to mean? His smile widened. You'll figure it out. Maybe I should have listened. Maybe I should have walked back inside and minded my own business. Instead, I finished my coffee, grabbed my lawnmower from the garage, and wheeled it across the street toward Claire's house. Claire looked up when she heard the lawnmower rolling across the street. For a second, she seemed confused. Then concerned, then slightly annoyed. I stopped at the edge of her yard. You don't have to do that. That was the first thing she said. Not hello. Not thank you. Just, you don't have to do that. I smiled. Good thing I want to. She crossed her arms. I can handle my own lawn. I believe you. Then why are you here? Fair question. I glanced toward the neighbors still pretending not to watch. Because apparently your grass has become a public emergency. For the first time, Claire laughed. It was quick, almost accidental, like she wasn't expecting to. That's not funny. It kind of is. She shook her head, then looked at the mower, then at me. You know they're talking about you now. I figured. And that doesn't bother you? I considered the question. Should it? That seemed to catch her off guard. For a moment she didn't know what to say. Finally, she stepped aside. Fine. Victory. Small, but still victory. An hour later, the lawn looked perfect. Not that it had been terrible before, but now nobody could complain. At least in theory. In practice, people who enjoy judging others usually find a new reason. I was putting the mower away when a small voice appeared behind me. Mom says I have to say thank you. I turned. A little girl stood there holding a glass of lemonade. Dark hair, serious expression, the kind children develop when they've seen more than they should. You must be Lily. She nodded. And you're Ryan. Apparently my reputation traveled faster than I thought. She handed me the lemonade, then narrowed her eyes. Why did you help us? Kids. Straight to the point every time. I laughed. Because the grass needed help. She didn't laugh. That's not the real reason. I nearly choked. Claire appeared on the porch. Lily. What? Stop interrogating the neighbor. Lily looked completely unapologetic. I was just asking. The scary thing? She actually reminded me of Claire. Same eyes. Same confidence. Just smaller. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things. Things nobody else seemed interested in seeing. Claire left before sunrise most mornings. Sometimes she came home after dark. Yet somehow she still made time for Lily's school events. Parent meetings. Soccer games. Science projects. Everything. One evening I watched her spend 2 hours helping Lily build a model volcano for school. The next morning she left for work after barely 5 hours of sleep. Nobody talked about that. They only talked about the divorce, or the rumors, or the mistakes they assumed she had made. It was strange. The more I learned about Claire, the less the neighborhood's version of her made sense. One Friday evening I found her sitting alone on her front steps. Lily was spending the weekend with Claire's sister. The street was quiet. The sunset painted everything gold. I nodded toward the empty seat beside her. Taken? A smile appeared. That depends. I laughed immediately. Why does that sound familiar? Because it's my favorite answer. I sat anyway. For a while we simply watched the neighborhood. Kids riding bikes. Dogs being walked. People pretending not to stare. Eventually I asked the question I'd been avoiding. What did you do? Claire turned toward me. What? The thing everyone thinks you did. Silence. Not angry. Not defensive. Just silence. Then she laughed. A quiet laugh filled with disbelief. I got divorced. I blinked. That's it. Pretty much. No. I shook my head. There's more. Claire stared down the street. Then sighed. There always has to be more. The sadness in her voice hit harder than I expected. Because it sounded like someone who'd spent years explaining herself to people who had already made up their minds. And suddenly I realized something. Maybe the real mystery wasn't what Claire had done. Maybe the mystery was why an entire neighborhood seemed so determined to believe the worst about her. The question stayed with me all weekend. Not because Claire had answered it. Because she hadn't. And somehow that felt more important. Most people rush to defend themselves. Claire didn't. She seemed tired of auditions. Tired of proving she deserved basic decency. The more I thought about it, the stranger it became. Monday evening, I was taking groceries from my car when I heard raised voices. Not yelling, but close. I looked across the street. 2 women stood near Claire's driveway. One of them was Karen Whitmore. If every neighborhood has an unofficial queen of gossip, ours had elected her unanimously. Claire stood facing them, calm. The women were not. I couldn't hear every word. Only pieces. Property values. Bad example. Always something. Then Claire said something so quietly I barely caught it. Are we done? One of the women crossed her arms. We're trying to help. Claire nodded. No. You're trying to feel important. The silence afterward was beautiful. The women left a minute later, clearly unhappy. Claire turned and saw me standing nearby. For a second we simply looked at each other. Then she smiled. A tired smile, but real. That Friday I finally learned the truth. Or at least part of it. It happened by accident. Frank was standing beside me while we watched Lily ride her bike. Nice kid. I nodded. Very. Frank grunted. Then, without warning, said, her ex-husband was popular. I looked at him. What? Claire's husband. There it was. The first actual piece of information anyone had offered. Frank continued. Football coach. Community volunteer. Everybody loved him. I waited. Then he left. Okay. Frank shrugged. People chose sides. Just like that. So simple. So stupid. And suddenly everything made sense. The next evening Claire and I sat on her porch drinking coffee. The summer air was warm. Lily was inside finishing homework. I told Claire what Frank had said. She laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. That's basically it. I stared. Seriously. She nodded. People loved Ethan. New name. Finally. Did he cheat? No. Did you? Her eyebrow lifted. I immediately regretted asking. Sorry. No. She smiled slightly. Neither of us did. Now I was confused. Then why did you divorce? Claire looked out toward the street. The same street that seemed to know everything about her except the truth. After a long silence, she answered. Because being loved by everyone else eventually became more important to him than being present at home. That sentence hit me hard. Because there was no anger in it. Only sadness. And sadness is usually harder to argue with. He wasn't a bad man. She continued quietly. That's the part people never understand. I listened. He just stopped showing up. A pause. For me. Another pause. For Lily. She smiled sadly. You'd be surprised how much damage someone can do while technically doing nothing wrong. I looked down at my coffee. That was one of the most honest things I'd heard in years. The following week something happened that changed everything. Lily disappeared. Not forever. Not even for very long. But for 20 terrifying minutes nobody knew where she was. One moment she was playing with friends at the neighborhood park. The next she wasn't. Within minutes the entire street was searching. Claire looked calmer than I expected. Until you looked at her eyes. Then you saw the panic. The fear. The worst thoughts every parent tries not to imagine. I joined the search immediately. Everyone did. Even Karen. Even Frank. For the first time all year the neighborhood seemed united. 22 minutes later we found Lily. She had followed an injured puppy into a wooded area behind the park. Completely safe. Completely unaware she'd nearly stopped her mother's heart. Claire dropped to her knees and hugged her so tightly that Lily could barely breathe. And that's when I noticed something. Something the rest of the neighborhood noticed too. Claire wasn't angry. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't worried about appearances. She was simply relieved. Purely. Completely. Like nothing else in the world mattered. And suddenly the rumors felt ridiculous. Because standing there in the fading sunlight, all anyone could see was a mother who loved her daughter more than anything. For the first time since moving here, I saw doubt in the faces of the people who had judged her. And I had a feeling that was only the beginning. The change didn't happen overnight. People rarely abandon their opinions that quickly, especially when those opinions have become part of their identity. But after the incident with Lily, something shifted. The whispers became quieter. The stares became shorter. And for the first time since moving to Maple Street, I noticed people actually talking to Claire instead of talking about her. Not everyone, but enough. One evening I found Claire sitting on her porch reading a book. A real book. Not a phone. Not a tablet. An actual hardcover novel with dog-eared pages. I walked over. What are you reading? She turned the cover toward me. Something that reminds me most people are smarter than my neighbors. I laughed. That's a low bar. Very low. I sat beside her. The sun was setting. The street was quiet. One of those rare evenings where nobody seemed to be in a hurry. After a few minutes, she closed the book. You know what bothers me? What? The fact that you're still here. I blinked. That's your complaint? Most people help once. She looked at me carefully. They get their good person points. Then they leave. There was no bitterness in her voice, which somehow made it worse, because it meant she'd experienced it enough times to stop being surprised. I looked down the street. Maybe I'm selfish. That got her attention. Selfish? Yeah. I smiled. I like talking to you. For a second she didn't answer. Then she looked away. The small smile that appeared on her face told me everything. Over the next month, Claire became the best part of my day. Not because we were dating. We weren't. Not yet. Not even close. We just talked. About work. About books. About parenting. About mistakes. About life. The strange thing was how easy it felt. There were no games. No pretending. No trying to impress each other. Just honesty. The kind most people spend years searching for. Then Ethan came back. Not permanently. Just for a visit. And suddenly I understood why half the neighborhood had taken his side. The man was charming, dangerously charming. He remembered names, asked questions, made people feel important. Within 10 minutes, he had 3 neighbors laughing. Within 20, he'd helped someone carry groceries. Within 30, he'd been invited to a barbecue. I almost admired him. Almost. Until I saw Claire's face. Not angry. Not jealous. Just tired. Very tired. Like she'd watched this movie before. Many times. That evening Ethan came to pick Lily up for dinner. I was watering flowers when he walked over. Ryan, right? I nodded. Ethan. We shook hands. Friendly. Polite. Normal. At least on the surface. He glanced toward Claire's house. Then back at me. You've been helping them. Not a question. A statement. I guess. He smiled. The same smile everyone seemed to love. Claire always finds good people. Something about the way he said it felt strange. Like a compliment hiding something else. Then he left. And I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been evaluating me. Not meeting me. Evaluating me. A week later, the neighborhood association held its annual summer meeting. Normally, I would have skipped it. Most people only attended to complain about parking or garbage cans. But this year Claire was on the agenda. Again, someone had filed another complaint. This time about an old fence behind her property. The complaint was ridiculous. Everyone knew it. Even Frank. Even Karen. But rules were rules. At least that's what they always said. Claire stood when her turn came. Calm. Collected. Prepared. The room waited. Some expecting an argument. Others expecting an apology. Instead, she did something completely different. She opened a folder and started presenting facts. Dates. Documents. Photos. Permits. Everything. No emotion. No drama. Just evidence. One by one, every complaint fell apart. Every accusation collapsed. Every assumption died under simple truth. The room became quieter with each page. Until finally nobody had anything left to say. Claire closed the folder, looked around the room, and smiled politely. Anything else? Silence. Absolute silence. And for the first time since moving to Maple Street, the entire neighborhood looked embarrassed. Not because Claire had won, because they realized how long they'd been wrong. And that realization is uncomfortable for everyone, including me, because I suddenly wondered how many other people I judged in my life without knowing their story. The meeting should have felt like victory, but Claire did not look victorious. She looked exhausted. After everyone left, I found her outside near the parking lot, standing beside her car with the folder pressed against her chest. Lily sat inside the car playing with a sticker book, completely unaware that her mother had just survived another public trial. You were incredible in there, I said. Claire gave a small smile. I was prepared. That's not the same thing. She looked at me then. For a second, the strong version of Claire disappeared. The version everyone else saw. The version that kept her voice calm while people questioned her character over fences and lawns. Underneath was a woman who had been tired for a very long time. Do you know how much energy it takes to be prepared for people to misunderstand you? I didn't answer, because I didn't have to. The question wasn't really for me. Claire looked toward the community center doors. I don't even want an apology from them. What do you want? She laughed softly. One quiet week. That broke my heart more than tears would have. Because she didn't ask for revenge. Or justice. Or admiration. Just peace. I stepped closer. Then let's start with tomorrow. She frowned slightly. What happens tomorrow? I fix that fence before anyone can complain about it again. For the first time that night, she laughed for real. Ryan. What? You have a problem. I do. You think every emotional issue can be solved with tools. Not every issue. I smiled. Just the important ones. She shook her head, but she was still smiling. And in that moment, standing under the yellow parking lot lights while Lily hummed quietly in the car, I realized something terrifying. I was no longer helping Claire because she needed help. I was helping because I wanted a reason to stay close. And that was much more dangerous. The realization stayed with me all week. Not because I wanted it to, because it was true. And the worst thing about truth is that once you see it, pretending becomes exhausting. So I stopped pretending, at least to myself. I liked Claire, not because she needed saving, not because she was lonely, not because I felt sorry for her. I liked her because she was one of the few people I'd ever met who seemed completely uninterested in being someone else. That kind of confidence is rare and strangely attractive. The following Saturday, I was halfway through repairing the fence when Lily appeared beside me carrying a juice box. "You like my mom." I nearly dropped the hammer. Kids. Absolutely terrifying. I looked down at her. "What makes you think that?" She sighed dramatically, the way only an 8-year-old can. "You smile different." I stared. She stared back. Somehow I felt like I was losing this conversation. Different how? More. Not exactly scientific. Yet somehow impossible to argue with. A few minutes later Claire stepped outside. "Are you bothering Ryan?" "No." Lily pointed at me. "We were talking about how he likes you." Claire froze. I froze. Lily continued drinking her juice, completely relaxed, because apparently chaos was her hobby. Inside, Claire pointed toward the house. "Now." Lily grinned, then disappeared through the front door, leaving the two of us standing there in awkward silence. Finally Claire covered her face. "Oh my God." I laughed. To be fair, she's very observant. She's impossible. Also true. For a moment we just stood there smiling. And suddenly the awkwardness wasn't awkward anymore. Just honest. That evening Claire invited me to dinner. Not a date. At least that's what we both pretended. Lily helped make spaghetti, which mostly meant creating additional work for Claire. The kitchen smelled like garlic and tomato sauce. Music played softly in the background. And for the first time in years, the house felt warm. Not physically, emotionally, like a place people actually lived, not just slept. After dinner, Lily disappeared upstairs. Claire and I stayed at the table, talking. As usual, hours seemed to pass that way, one conversation becoming another, until eventually the room grew quiet. Claire looked toward the staircase, then back at me. "You know what scares me?" The question caught me off guard. "What?" A small smile appeared. "You're going to make me sound dramatic." "I doubt it." She stared at her coffee, then finally said, "I got used to doing everything alone." I listened. "When you've spent enough years depending only on yourself." She searched for the right words. "Letting someone matter becomes frightening." The honesty in that sentence landed directly in my chest, because I understood it too well. I looked at her, really looked at her. Not the strong version, not the neighbor everyone talked about, just Claire, a woman trying to rebuild her life one day at a time. The same thing I'd been trying to do. "You don't have to do everything alone." The words came out quietly. Claire's eyes met mine, and suddenly neither of us looked away. The room seemed smaller, the distance between us shorter. For a moment nobody spoke. Nobody needed to, because sometimes the most important conversations happen in silence. Then a voice came from upstairs. "Mom!" Both of us jumped. The moment shattered instantly. Claire laughed first. Then I did. And somehow that made everything easier. Not because the feeling disappeared, because now we both knew it was there, and neither of us was running from it anymore. A few weeks later, something happened that nobody expected, least of all me. It started with a storm, a real one, heavy rain, strong winds, the kind of weather that makes every homeowner nervous. Around midnight, the power went out across half the neighborhood. Tree branches snapped. Trash cans rolled through the streets. Everyone stayed inside hoping the damage would be minor. It wasn't. The next morning people emerged from their houses to assess the situation. Broken fences, fallen limbs, damaged roofs, the usual aftermath. Then somebody noticed the giant oak tree behind Claire's property. Part of it had collapsed. One massive branch had crashed through her detached garage. The roof was destroyed. The wall partially caved in. The damage was significant. Within an hour, half the neighborhood was standing nearby, watching, talking, offering opinions, very few offering help. I arrived carrying a chainsaw. Claire was already there speaking with an insurance representative. Calm as always, even though her garage looked like a disaster zone. Lily sat on the porch steps holding her backpack. School started in an hour, yet she seemed more worried about her mother than the storm. That told me everything. Then Karen appeared. Of course she did. Karen always arrived when there was an audience. She shook her head dramatically. What a shame. Nobody answered. She continued anyway. I guess this is what happens when trees aren't maintained. The insurance representative immediately frowned. Actually, this storm damage appears unavoidable. Karen looked disappointed, which was honestly impressive. Most people would be relieved. I watched Claire carefully, waiting for a reaction, an argument, anything. Instead, she thanked the insurance representative and continued discussing repair estimates. Professional, calm, focused, the same way she'd handled everything. And suddenly something clicked inside me. For months, these people had expected Claire to become the person they imagined. Difficult, emotional, irresponsible, bitter. Yet every time reality gave her the opportunity, she chose dignity instead. Around noon, something surprising happened. Frank showed up with tools. Then another neighbor arrived. Then another. Then another. Within an hour, 6 people were helping remove debris. No speeches. No announcements. No dramatic apologies. Just action. Sometimes that's more meaningful. Claire looked genuinely confused. So we're helping now? Frank rubbed the back of his neck. Seems that way. She stared at him. He stared at the ground. Finally he sighed. You know. The entire street seemed to pause, because Frank never admitted he was wrong. Ever. I think we misjudged you. Silence. Real silence. Not awkward. Important. Karen wasn't there anymore. Neither were most of the people who loved gossip. Only the people willing to work remained. Claire looked around. At the neighbors carrying branches. At the people repairing damage. At the community she'd spent years living beside but never truly belonging to. Then she smiled. A small one. But I could tell it mattered. I appreciate that. No lecture. No revenge. No list of grievances. Just grace. More than most people would have offered. That evening, after everyone left, we sat together on her back porch. The damaged garage stood in the distance. But somehow the world felt lighter. The sun was setting. The air smelled like wet grass. And for once, nothing needed fixing. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then Claire broke the silence. Thank you. I looked at her. For what? For seeing me. The answer caught me completely off guard. She continued quietly. Before all this, she gestured toward the neighborhood. Before anyone changed their mind. For a moment I couldn't find words. Because the truth was, I hadn't done anything extraordinary. I just sat down. Just listened. Just stayed. The same way she had done for me more times than she realized. Claire looked down at her hands. Then back at me. You know something? What? A smile slowly appeared. The funny thing is. Here we go. Another one of her famous lines. The funny thing is that I thought I was learning how to trust people again. I smiled. And her eyes met mine. And somehow I ended up falling in love with one. For a second, everything else disappeared. The damaged garage. The neighborhood. The storm. Gone. Only her remained. And the fact that she was smiling while saying the thing both of us had known for weeks. Maybe months. I laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because I was happy. And sometimes happiness catches you off guard. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Claire rolled her eyes. Then leaned closer. And for the first time, there was no hesitation between us at all. 6 months later, Maple Street looked exactly the same. And completely different. The houses hadn't changed. The trees hadn't moved. The road still needed repairs. But people had. Sometimes that's enough. The garage had been rebuilt. Better than before. The fence stood straight. The lawn was perfectly fine. Not that anyone seemed to care anymore. The neighborhood had finally discovered something surprising. Claire was never the problem. The stories about her had been. One Saturday morning, the annual community picnic filled the park. Families spread blankets across the grass. Children ran everywhere. Music played from portable speakers. The same people who once whispered about Claire now greeted her by name. Not because she had changed, because they had finally bothered to know her. I stood beside the grill helping Frank burn hamburgers, his specialty. Across the park, Claire sat beneath a tree reading, while Lily attempted to teach 3 younger kids the rules of a game she had invented 5 minutes earlier. Naturally, she was already acting like a CEO. I smiled. Frank noticed. "You look happy." I glanced toward Claire. "Yeah." He nodded slowly, then surprised me. "You know, I owe her an apology." That wasn't a sentence I ever expected to hear from Frank. "What stopped you?" He stared at the crowd. "Pride." Fair. At least he was honest. Later that afternoon, Claire walked over carrying 2 lemonades. One for herself, one for me. The simple kind of gesture that somehow meant more now. She handed me the drink, then sat beside me, comfortable, natural, like she'd always been there. Maybe that's what real love feels like. Not fireworks, not chaos, not drama, just the strange realization that your favorite place has become a person. Lily appeared a moment later, now 9 years old, still terrifyingly observant. She looked at both of us, then smiled, a dangerous smile, the kind children get right before causing trouble. "What?" Claire asked suspiciously. Lily pointed toward me. "I was right." "Oh no." Claire sighed immediately. "About what?" Lily looked delighted. "He liked you first." I nearly choked on my lemonade. Claire started laughing. Lily crossed her arms proudly. "I told Mom months ago." Of course she did. Kids notice everything. As the sun began to set, the picnic slowly ended. People packed chairs, loaded coolers, called children home. The park became quieter. Claire slipped her hand into mine. A simple gesture. The same one that once would have caused gossip. Now nobody cared. And that felt strangely perfect. We watched Lily race across the grass toward her friends. Laughing, happy, free. The kind of happiness every parent hopes to protect. Claire leaned against my shoulder. Neither of us said anything for a while. Eventually she asked, "Do you ever think about that first day?" I smiled. "The lawn. The lawn." I laughed. "Sometimes." Claire shook her head. "One ridiculous HOA complaint. And here we are. Here we are." People often ask when I fell in love with Claire. The truth? I don't know. Maybe it happened during those long conversations on the porch. Maybe it happened when I watched her refuse to become bitter. Maybe it happened when she stood in front of an entire room and defended herself with nothing but truth. Or maybe it happened the very first day. The day everyone else saw a problem. And I saw a person. Because in the end, Claire didn't need someone to rescue her. She had been strong all along. What she needed was someone willing to see her clearly. And if there's one thing Maple Street taught me, it's that the loneliest people aren't always the ones who are alone. Sometimes they're the ones surrounded by people who never took the time to understand them. I almost became one of those people. I'm grateful every day that I didn't.